And our talk will be given by Gabriele Oettingen. Gabriele Oettingen is a professor of psychology at New York University and the University of Hamburg, Germany. She is the author of more than 150 articles and book chapters on the societal and psychological origins of thinking about the future, as well as on its consequences for the control of cognition, emotion, and behavior. Her work is published in Social and Personality Psychology, Developmental and Educational Psychology, Health and Clinical Psychology, Organizational and Consumer Psychology, as well as in neuropsychological and medical journals. Her findings contribute to the burgeoning literature on behavior and lifestyle change, and businesses and institutions have increasingly become interested in the application of her research. Her first trade book, Rethinking Positive Thinking, Inside the New Science of Motivation, was published in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Gabriele Oettingen.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much that I can be here. I'm really honored, and I want to thank AASP, and I want to thank Brent Walker, especially for inviting me. This is fun for me. First of all, because I hope that I can give you some new ideas. But second of all, I hope that your ideas about what I'm talking about will come back and we will enter an exchange. So before I even start my presentation, I want to ask you a tactless question. I want to ask you, how do you act on your fantasies? How do you make your fantasies come true? How do you implement your fantasies of excelling in a competition, of improving your training, of excelling on an exam, and more trivial things, on not drinking too much in the evening, getting up really early, training, and then have a lean breakfast, on finishing your emails, and at the same time having a good time with your family and friends, on tackling long procrastinated projects, on being a little nicer to a person you don't particularly care about. So, how do you make your fantasies come true? You might have asked yourself these questions, and you might have had a ready answer. Think positive. Wish it, will it, and then you will do it. Now, our research over the past 25 years has shown that these positive thoughts and images about the future actually can hurt effort and can hurt success when it comes to implementing these fantasies. For example, the more positively people who had been enrolled in a weight reduction program fantasized about the success in the program, the fewer pounds they shed. 3 months later, 1 year later, and even 2 years later. The more positively university graduates fantasized about an easy transition into work life. The fewer dollars they earned. 2 years later, the fewer job offers they had gotten, and the fewer job applications they had sent out. The more positively students fantasized about a good grade in the exam, the less well they did. And the more positively they fantasized about getting together with their crushee, the less likely they were actually starting a romantic relationship. And in the health area, the more positively hip replacement surgery patients fantasized about an easy recovery, the less well could they move their joint, the fewer stairs could they walk up, and the less well was their general recovery as judged by the physical therapist. And even in the area of mental health, the more positively people fantasize about the future, the less depressed they were at the moment, but over time they got more depressed. So what is it then with these pleasurable fantasies and daydreams about the future, these thoughts about the future, that make them a problem for physical and mental health and for effort and success? Now, we did some experimental follow-up research where we induced positive thoughts and images about the future in one group of people, and then in the other groups, we induced negative thoughts or questioning thoughts or factual thoughts or no thoughts, depending on the study, the different control groups. And what we found is that in those who were induced these positive thoughts about the future, that these felt accomplished. They felt they had already achieved their desired future. And then they relaxed. So the energy went down. And you can measure that by either measuring the systolic blood pressure or feelings of energization. They went down. And these lowered energy levels then predicted the low effort and the low success in daily life. So, shall we then dismiss these positive visions about the future? No, we can't. Because these positive fantasies and daydreams about the future, they come from our needs. So when you deprive people of water, for example, they fantasize about drinking water, about getting to the water fountain. Or when you deprive people of meaning, they fantasize about a meaningful job, about a meaningful life. So these positive visions about the future, they are important because they're important to fulfill our needs. They give action the direction. But at the same time, if we indulge in these positive thoughts about the future, then we lack the energy needed to implement these positive fantasies. So what we then actually need is to complement these positive fantasies about the future with a good, solid sense of reality. And that's what we did when we discovered the strategy of mental contrasting. Mental contrasting the desired future with the inner obstacles that stand in the way of this desired future. And this is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about mental contrasting of the future with the reality. I want to describe the principle. I want to describe some mechanisms, some intervention work we have done, and then finally, how we recently tried to disseminate it among the general public. So what is the principle? As I said, we start with imagining the desired future, experiencing in your mind the desired future, but then changing the gear and saying, what stops me from actually implementing this desired future? What is my inner obstacle to implementing this desired future? And then imagining that inner obstacle. And by doing that, what happens is that you understand what is actually in my way. And if the obstacle is surmountable, then you will say, oh, now I know what I will do, and you will be fully determined. You will love it. You will go for it. Whereas if the obstacle is either formidable so that you can't get over it, or it is just not fitting in your life at the moment, it's too costly, then you will say, okay, I need to adapt the wish, or I need to postpone wish fulfillment to a better point in time, or I let go. But I let go with good conscience. And letting go then sets the energy free for more feasible alternative projects. So mental contrasting is a strategy to prioritize, to understand which goals, which wishes really belong to me and which are feasible. But on the other hand, to also understand maybe that wish is not so important after all. And maybe I just simply cannot reach it. So mental contrasting is a strategy to clean up your life, to set priorities. So how does this look like? So you ask yourself, what is my most important wish? The wish that I really care for. So this person might say, I want to be fully focused. And then you ask yourself, what is the best outcome I associate with fulfilling my wish? How would I feel? So you might say, oh, I could place in my race next week. And you imagine then this placing in the race. And then you say, what is the most critical obstacle in me that holds me back, that stands in the way of fulfilling my wish and experiencing that outcome? So it might be, I'm worrying that I'm not good enough. And then you imagine that worry. That's all. That's mental contrasting. So our typical experiments have as independent variable, as predictor variable, either the measure or the manipulate of expectations as a proxy for the surmountability of the obstacle. And then we manipulate the modes of thought. So either mental contrasting, or just thinking about the future, or just grumbling about the negative reality, or factual thought, or no thoughts, depending on the study. And as outcome variables, as dependent variables, we have goal pursuit, meaning how persistent am I? How much effort do I put in reaching my goal? Behavior change, so do I excel? So what are the mechanisms? So we showed that mental contrasting does what we expected in very many areas. So in the health area, in the achievement area, in the interpersonal area. So the question really is, what are the mechanisms? Why does mental contrasting lead to behavior change, to active goal pursuit? And there are three answers to that. Mental contrasting is a conscious imagery strategy with non-conscious consequences, meaning with consequences outside of people's awareness. So, for example, it triggers changes in non-conscious cognition. It glues the positive future to the obstacle and the obstacle to the instrumental means to surmount the obstacle. So it builds these strong associative links outside of people's awareness, and these strong links then mediate or predict the behavior change. So this behavior change is then automatic. And it also leads to changes in the interpretation of the reality so that you recognize the obstacles and that you identify the obstacles. So for example, if you have a big race on Wednesday, let's say, then the party on Saturday night is not a fun party anymore. Now it's the obstacle to doing well in the race. So it changes the meaning of the reality. And by doing that, it predicts behavior change. And that's all outside of people's awareness. Now, the second answer is really changes in motivation, meaning changes in energy. And you can, again, measure that by systolic blood pressure or by feelings of energization. So if you mentally contrast feasible wishes, energy goes up. So the energy you need in order to fulfill these wishes. And the third mechanism is it changes the responses to setbacks. So if you have setbacks or if you get critical feedback, you get the information out of this critical feedback and you process it and you integrate it into your plans and into your goal pursuit. At the same time, you don't take negative feedback personal. So you have two advantages. You are not offended and you process the information and you implement it into goal pursuit. And again, that mediates the behavior change. So we know it works, we know how it works, and now we thought, okay, let's do interventions. But maybe we don't even need to do interventions. Maybe people spontaneously mental contrasting, all of us do that. So then you don't need to intervene. So we have done a lot of studies showing that actually very few people do spontaneous mental contrasting. They indulge in the positive future, or they grumble about the negative reality, but they don't get it together. And I want to present one little study out of the dance sport athletes When we look at dance sport athletes who are really doing competitive sports here, and you see here the non-experts on the left side. The blue column is mental contrasting spontaneously done. In the non-experts, hardly any person would do mental contrasting. They all do more indulging, and predominantly indulging, actually. But among the experts, you see that about a third would do mental contrasting. It's not a lot, but still, it's more than in the non-experts. And if you take only the experts, and you want to predict how well they do in the upcoming competition, then those who do mental contrasting and who do more mental contrasting do better. Meaning mental contrasting predicts high performance among these athletes. Okay, now that we know people don't do it spontaneously, we can see, okay, can we teach it to people? And we started with seeing whether managers who are taught mental contrasting versus taught just positive thinking, whether they do better in their daily life. And what you see here, as opposed to the people who just positively think, the managers who have been taught mental contrasting do better in terms of time management, ease of deciding. They complete some project, but they also let go from others, meaning they prioritize. Another study, improving health behavior. And would mental contrasting transfer from one area to the next? So these were students who wanted to eat more healthily, and we taught them mental contrasting versus nothing versus just positive thinking. And again, the blue columns. So the ones who had been taught mental contrasting, they eat more low-calorie food and less high-calorie food, fewer calories overall, and they do more exercise. So it transfers from one area to the next. We don't know exactly how, whether it's because they also do mental contrasting with respect to exercise, whether it's the energy that transfers, or whether eating more healthily leads to more sports, but it does transfer. This is a study on physical activity among overweight fishermen by Pascal Shearing. He looked in Northern England at a club of people who, as their hobby, did a lot of fishing. And these were overweight men, predominantly, and they got the newsletter every month. And half of these people who got the newsletter got also a little instruction on mental contrasting, on activity, being more active. And what he found then, when he called them up after 1 month, that those who got this minimal instruction of mental contrasting with the newsletter, that they did more physical activity. After 7 months, they did even more physical activity. And if you look at the change from 0, from baseline, to 7 months, then you find that there was more physical activity among the mental contrasting group than the control group. So here is a summary: cigarette reduction, coping with stress, exercise, healthy eating. These were studies we all did. Problem solving, taking social responsibility, help seeking and help giving, reconciliation after trespasses, vocational training, studying abroad, people are more open, excelling in math, and doing better in creativity tests. Now we asked ourselves, what about if the obstacles are really hard to come by? Bad habits, strong impulses, strong emotions like anger. So we thought, okay, let's combine mental contrasting with another strategy in the literature, implementation intentions. This is a strategy which has been found to work well if these obstacles to goal pursuit are really heavy. And this strategy was discovered by Peter Goldwitzer, also at NYU, and they come in the form of if-then plans. If situation X occurs, then I will perform the goal-directed behavior Y. So for example, to take the example from before, if I worry not being good enough, then I will just concentrate on the task. So how do these implementation intentions work? they activate the critical situation. So you remember the critical situation, you remember, worry. You differentiate worry among all the different emotions you might have, and you put your attention on the worry. And that triggers automatic action initiation. So you act immediately, focusing on the task. You don't need to think twice. Do I need to focus now? No, you focus. You don't need mental effort to focus, and you don't need to have another intention. So you immediately focus without that you even know. Now, so that implementation intentions or if-then plans work, you need to have a very strong determination to the overarching goal. And the if component, the situation, needs to be a critical situation. And the then component, the behavior, needs to be a relevant goal-directed activity. Now, mental contrasting establishes all three prerequisites. It glues you to the wish fulfillment. It identifies a critical situation by naming the obstacle, and it identifies in the imagery of the obstacle the behavior to overcome the obstacle. So we ended up with a complicated term, mental contrasting with implementation intention. So in the scientific literature, it's called MCII. How does MCII work practically? You need 5 minutes, quiet, slow, calm. And then you ask yourself, what is my wish? What do I really want? Something that is feasible, but still challenging. So she might say that my rowing aid wins next weekend's race. Then you say, what would be the best outcome if I fulfilled myself that wish? So she might say, oh, we will celebrate. And then she imagines the celebration. And then change gears. What is my inner obstacle? Actually, what impedes me from fulfilling my wish and experiencing that outcome? My tendency to let my teammates do the work and imagine that tendency. And then the if-then plan. If I start letting my teammates do the work, I will remind myself that every stroke counts. And that's WHOOP. Wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. So, WHOOP as a behavior change intervention. We tested that. So one study with 250 women, improving exercise and diet. So we had an information control group and an information plus WHOOP group. Over 4 months, they had a diary. How much exercise did they do was the question. So this is a little reminder card, sort of exemplifying how you can do WHOOP on a daily basis. Exercising in the evening. Feeling balanced. Imagine. I'm so tired when I come home. Imagine. When I come home, tired at 7 p.m., then I take my iPhone and exercise. And that automatizes the processes. And before you even know, you sit on your bicycle at home. So what it does is, in that study, it improved exercise an hour per week in the WHOOP group as opposed to the information control group. And that was sustained over 4 months. If you look at improving diet, we found an interesting pattern. At the beginning, there were sometimes differences, sometimes not. But then when we let people go alone for 2 years, this 1 hour intervention of WHOOP with a half an hour telephone follow-up still showed effects after 2 years, with people eating 1 portion of fruits and vegetables more in the WHOOP group than in the information control group. So, improving physical capacity in chronic back pain patients, we wanted to know, can we also apply it to patients? These are chronic back pain patients, and after 3 weeks in the hospital, they did more lifts in 2 minutes in the Whoop group, and when they then were going home in their own environment, after 3 months they came back and they were even more physically capable of doing these lifts in 2 minutes. Improving exercise in stroke patients, can we also use it in patients who had a stroke? And we see here in the Whoop group, as opposed to an active control group that got the exercises, the mental exercises of the hospital and an improved hospital therapy exercise, in the Whoop group, we have more sports activity still a year after the intervention and more weight loss, sort of 2 kilo and 1 kilo more than in the control group. And then finally, also in mental illness, you have more activity by being taught Whoop. And here you see that 3 weeks after the intervention, people with mild and major depression did reach their activity goal more successfully. So again, let's summarize: exercise, stress management, pain management. Recent data also show that it helps for insomnia. People are fairer, they find more win-win solutions in conflict resolution paradigms. They take more perspective, they're more cooperative, and they have more sustainable consumption, less red meat over time. More work engagement, better time management, more effective negotiations, and better course grades. So what is different from traditional behavior change interventions? Now, many behavior change interventions work via changing attitudes, making the attitudes more positive towards a certain behavior, and changing efficacy, making people more efficacious. Or they change the framing. So for example, in alcohol research, they say, okay, you know, the other people drink less than you. But then they drink less after this framing, but once they get in their own environment again, the drinking goes up again. Or they change the content of goals. Think about Carol Dweck's work on learning goals versus performance goals. Now, Whoop doesn't do that. Whoop leaves the attitudes alone and the efficacy alone because they are so hard to change. Whoop is a meta-cognitive strategy that you apply, or everybody can apply, to his or her own thoughts. And by doing that, you automatize your own behavior. You program yourself to act in the desired way in the specific situation, in the specific future situation. So it's a metacognitive strategy working via automatic, non-conscious processes. So it is like a bicycle. You can learn Whoop like riding a bicycle, or like swimming, or like skiing. It's a skill, it's a tool. It automates behavior. It builds good habits and it breaks bad habits. And you can apply it across age in second graders or also in old age. So what did I do? I talked about the principle of mental contrasting, about the mechanisms, the non-conscious mechanisms. I told you about some interventions. And finally, I want to say 2 words about our efforts to disseminate. So since we know it's a very cost and time effective strategy that is content independent, meaning as long as you keep the 4 steps of Whoop faithfully, you can fill in any wish you have. So we thought, okay, let's give it out. We don't want to have it in the scientific journals only. We want to give it to people. So what did we do? We started with a website, whoopmylife.org. So we started the website, we built the website. So it has a little video talking about the science, talking about what WOOP is all about. It has selected publications on there. It has a book, Rethinking Positive Thinking, which describes the science, but also a lot of kind of applied examples. You can read about the press, but more importantly, you can use the app. So we have an app with these specific instructions of these 4 steps, which you then can go through basically every morning if you want. So you can WOOP the wishes for the day, and you get more clarity, more prioritization for your everyday life and for the long-term development. I mean, if you have a difficult problem to solve, get clarity with WOOP. It helps. So the app, and then Get Up and WOOP, which has a WOOP kit, and people can download it and can learn how to WOOP and have fun with it. So I want to thank the Motivation Labs at NYU, at the University of Hamburg, and I want to thank you sort of bearing with me until kind of late in the afternoon, early evening, and thank you so much for listening. And if you have any kind of comments or recommendations or anything about the website or the app, just write to us. You can write to us, and we are happy for any criticism, for any comments. Just we want to exchange. Thank you.